Randy Scroggins is pastor of New Beginnings Church of God in Roseburg, Oregon. His daughter Lacey was in the classroom when the shooter carried out his deadly attack. She says she owes her life to a young man she knew in high school. His last act was to partially cover her own body with his own, leading the killer to pass her by. Pastor Scroggins joins us now by Skype. First, Pastor Randy, how is Lacey doing today?
She's doing better, but she is still tremendously shaken. If I probably could describe it, I would describe it as she's taking things a minute at a time. She's got a moment where she will be fine, and then she has a moment that she will have a breakdown. But she is getting through. She's a very strong young lady.
How did she describe the attack to you?
She told me that I'm actually the one that dropped her off at college. We'd been working on her driving skills. She had just purchased a stick shift, a manual. And so I dropped her off at college, and she went in. She said that 10 o'clock came, and the class began. It's a writing class. And she said it was absolutely normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary. And then around 10:27, she said, I remember 10:27 because I looked up at the clock, wondering how much longer I was going to have to be in class today. And then she said around 10:30-ish, we know now that it was approximately 10:38, but she said around 10:30-ish, she says, I heard, Daddy, she said, I heard a pop. She describes a gunshot as a pop. She said, I looked over to my left and I seen a hole in the window. I didn't know what that was. I couldn't understand that. And then she said, immediately after that, the shooter came into the room. He shot into the ceiling a few shots and told everyone to get down. Lacey remembers looking towards the front of the class for her professor, Dr. Levine, and didn't see him. He was gone. In her words, he was gone. And then she looked to the left. She's on the floor, but she looks to the left and she watches the shooter as he executes one of the students. He then goes to the front of the class. At that time, Lacey actually put her head down on the floor, and she actually thought for a moment, this is a drill. This can't be real. This isn't really happening. She actually thought for a moment that somebody was going to say, okay, it's over now. Go ahead and get back up and write what you've seen and describe it. And then she dawned on her that this was no drill and that it was real. It was very, very real. And she then describes, she hears as the shooter is up front, and he says, you in the orange shirt, stand up. And she describes the conversation as this. She says, as the shooter looks at him and says, what religion are you? Are you a Christian? And when he acknowledges yes, she hears a gunshot, and then she describes it as hearing the thud of the body as it hit the ground. Lacey says that she then heard him say to somebody else, you come here. And her conversation to me was as such. She says that she hears the shooter say, you're not going to die today. You're the lucky one. I've got something for you, and I want you to give this to the police when they come in. But while he was talking to her, Lacey hears a gunshot. She thinks he has just shot that individual who he just told, you're the lucky one. Here's the good news to that part of the story. Late Saturday evening, I'm sleeping. I'm getting ready. I'm out. It's been a busy weekend. This horrific act it's taken its drain on a lot of people. And I decided to look at I was drowsing. I decided to look at my email one last time before I went to sleep. And when I looked at it, I noticed that Summer, the mother of the one that we thought had been shot, is on the email. We read that email, and in the email, the mom says, I'm Summer. I'm Matthew's mom. I wanted to let you know He did not get shot. He's alive. As a matter of fact, we're going to be at your services in the morning, and we just want to know if we could talk with you. The good news about that is they were not only in the service that morning, but the young man who was in that room that Lacey thought was shot, him and my daughter both sat side by side on the front row of that service yesterday. That was absolutely amazing for both of them.
Pastor Randy, sorry to interrupt. May I ask, what was Lacey, what was she experiencing at that time? Was she praying? What was she thinking as she's hearing these sounds and these conversations that are taking place?
I asked her that, and this was amazing to me. The first thing that she did, and not just as a father, not just as a pastor, but a combination between both of those, she said to me, Daddy, all I knew to do was to pray. I actually told my church yesterday, I said, folks, you go ahead and teach your kids how to play baseball and soccer, and you teach them how to hunt, you teach them how to fish. But I'm telling you, there's going to come a day when you're going to wish you had taught them how to pray. My daughter, I'm sorry. My daughter began to pray. And I asked her, I said, honey, I know you were praying. What else were you thinking? She said, Daddy, I just knew that that was the day that I was going to die. Immediately after that situation with the young man that he called Lucky, he calls up another lady. And he says to that lady, if you will beg for your life, I will not kill you. The lady starts to beg for her life. And in the midst of begging for her life, he shoots her. At that time, he told everyone, he had already told them to get down, but this time he said, I want you in the center of the room, and I want you tight, compact into the center of the room. They scurried to the center of the room, Lacey said, and right next to Lacey, there was a young man by the name of Trevin. They were all in the prone position. Their arms are out in front of them. Lacey's head is on her hands in front of her. And Trevin is right beside her, but about 12 to 18 inches above her. And at that point, the gunman actually comes to the center of the room, and he simply starts to shoot people either in the head or shoots them in the back. He just starts shooting. At that point, Lacey said, there was a gunshot that was so close to my head that my ears popped. My ears started to ring. I couldn't hardly hear anything. And then all of a sudden, she felt the weight of Trevin as his body shifted over onto Lacey's. She told me, she said, Daddy, she said, I could feel his body getting heavier and heavier and heavier as he put part of his body on mine. And then she said, Dad, I felt something so warm, and I looked down under my arm, and she said, I seen his blood coming out of him, and his blood was getting all over me, all over my arm, all over the side of me. And at that time is when the shooter came up behind my daughter, stood over her and said, get up, get up. And Lacey, again, at that moment, told me I didn't know anything to do but to pray. And then she said, Dad, I knew I was dying today. He said to the lady next to Lacey, on the other side of Lacey, who he had already shot, he said to her, is this girl, referring to my daughter, Lacey, is she dead? The lady said, I don't know. And with that, he crossed over my daughter and shot the next individual. At that time, Lacey remembers distinctly the conversation he had with the next victim. And the lady actually said to him, I'm so sorry for your hurt. And I'm so sorry for the things that people have put you through. And his reply was this, I'm sure you are, but that's not good enough. And then he shot her. somewhere in the midst of that, and I don't know exactly when it was, but somewhere in the midst of those conversations, there was a man that came to the door and asked the question, what's going on in here? And with that, the gunman turned to him and shot him. The man went down and said, please don't shoot me anymore. Please. I have a boy whose birthday is today. Please. And with that, the gunman just began to shoot him over and over and over again. Lacey said it was somewhere around the conversation of the lady that said, I'm sorry you've been hurt. He shot her. It was somewhere in there that Lacey said, all of a sudden I heard a barrage of gunfire. We know now what that was. That was the police officers coming to their rescue. And there was a gunfight that happened between the shooter and between the police officers. And then Lacey heard the last words of the shooter. And the last words were, you got me. I've had enough. I'm shot. He goes down to the ground. My daughter then, Lacey, looks up and looks over at him and realizes he's gone. She stands up. She goes to an individual that's bleeding. She takes her scarf off of her and she begins to tie a tourniquet on that particular individual. Then she goes to another individual, takes a coat off and tries to tie a tourniquet on there and even tells the lady, you've got to put your thumb in the hole. We've got to stop the bleeding. At that time, I'm so proud of everyone in that class, because at that time, people got up and they started helping one another.
Pastor Randy,
Then,
sorry,
yes.
you truly believe that Treven's act truly saved her life. Is that right?
There is no question in our minds that that shooter looked down, seen the blood of Treven, on my daughter, and thought she was dead. His blood saved my daughter's life that day. I have no doubt of that.
Have you had a chance, sir, to speak with Treven's family?
That was a beautiful conversation. It was on Saturday. I was actually doing an interview at the church. I had left my number for someone to get it to Treven's parents. I did not feel like I had the right to intrude upon their lives at this time. So I made sure they had my phone number. During an interview, and I told them as soon as I get a phone call, if I get a phone call, I need to leave the interview. When that call came in, I left that interview and I went over and I answered the call, and it was Treven's mother. She introduced herself. Of course, I introduced myself. Immediately, we began to weep and to cry with each other. And then I said to her, as a father and as a pastor, the information that I have, if I didn't think it would be beneficial to your family, I would not have bothered you. But I think it's something that you would like to hear. I told her, I said, I'd be glad to meet with you anywhere you want to meet. And then she said to me, Pastor, I need to know what my boy did, but I need to know right now. And I began to share the events of how Treven, in his last, I believe, conscious effort, put his body onto my little girl. And his blood spilled upon my little girl. And I believe that his body and his blood saved my daughter's life. And I must tell you, this is an interview that I have been looking forward to, because I know what you guys stand for. I told my church on Sunday, I told everyone that was there how beautiful this type is, that Treven, a human being, was able to save the physical life of my daughter. Can you imagine the power of the blood of Christ? Because he doesn't just save the physical, he saves the spiritual. But back to what you said. Do I believe that Treven saved my girl's life? with every fiber in me, I believe his blood was the reason that the shooter passed over my daughter.
Pastor Randy, how do you move forward from this horrific event?
You know, I'm going to take my cues from my daughter because she can actually answer this better than I can. So I'm going to use her words. And here's what she said. Here's what she wants a nation to know. He made a victim out of me on Thursday. I will not allow him to make me a victim again. And what she meant by that was this. I had no control over what he did when he came into that classroom, but I do have control over it now. My daughter has chose to get up and move on. And even when her parents, when her mom and I said, hey, just stay in, just be with us, don't worry about it. She said, I got to get back to work. I got school to attend and I have a job to do. And you know, she taught all of us something. And those kids in that room taught all of us something. They're getting up and they're moving forward. So how do we move forward? We take their cues. We're not going to allow someone to take our future away from us here in Roseburg. The act of terror is not going to define who we are here in Roseburg. We refuse to allow that kind of violence to tell a nation who we are. So we're going to get up. We're going to move forward. And we're going to become better as a community and closer as a community than we have ever been in the history, I believe, of Roseburg.
Pastor Randy, I know that you are familiar, you're cognizant of what takes place in other parts of the world where the body of Christ is suffering. I think of places like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, where people are confronted with that question of if you are a Christian, you end up losing your life. What is your message to Christians in America that, when you are confronted with your faith and you are asked that question and you don't have seconds to answer, what do you say to those who are believers to take a stand and not to be ashamed for their faith?
The greatest book in the history of mankind. If we stick with that, it will give us answers to everything that we have. And the question that you just asked, and this isn't just a preacher answer, this is a Christian answer. It is the greatest answer. Paul says this. Paul says to die is actually to live with Christ. And we all look forward to that day. I can't explain evil. I can't explain why things happen. But I do know this, as one that follows Jesus Christ, I know that one way or the other, I'm going to see him. I'm going to talk with him. I'm going to eat with him. I get to live with him. And that was actually the attitude of my daughter, Lacey. When that time came and that shooter had a gun on her saying, get up. And if she had moved, she would have died. Her thought was, today, I'm going to die. But her thought was, today, I'm going to see Jesus. I would encourage everyone around the world, don't lose your faith. The answer to all of our problems, his name is Jesus. Don't lose your faith. Don't be defined by hatred. Don't be defined by terrorism. Don't be defined by violence of this world. Be defined by one called Christ. He is the one that defines us. And don't get locked up in this shooter. Don't get locked up thinking that all violence is what he did. You see, it wasn't just violence, it was evil. And evil's been around since the time of Adam and Eve. And evil's not going to leave, but I am going to share this. Let me say this to anybody that hears this. Here's what the Bible says. No matter what violence is there, I'm telling you, my Bible says that grace does much more abound. Violence is there, evil is there, but the grace of God is greater than anything that the enemy could bring to us. Don't lose your faith. Hang on, because the time's coming where we're going to see Jesus, all of us, together.
Pastor Randy Scroggins, thank you so much for those powerful words. Please Please let Lacey know that we here at CBN News and the Christian Broadcasting Network are praying for her and those families that have been affected
Thank
by
you so
this
much.
tragedy. And please, our best wishes to her. Folks, Pastor Scroggins, the pastor of New Beginnings Church of God in Roseburg, Oregon. Sir, thank you for your insights and your powerful message at this time of difficulty for your community and indeed for the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you too.